Most people think that in order to play with great time, you just need to practice to a metronome more. But the truth is that great timing is ultimately found somewhere else. If you're playing with a band and you've struggled with rushing, dragging, and always being afraid that you're speeding up and ruining the song, then today's lesson is for you. When I was a young drummer in high school getting started playing with people, my biggest fear was rushing. I was constantly afraid that I was speeding up because most of the time I was, but years later, I learned something that made keeping good time so much easier and much more reliable and effortless. Today we're breaking down the timing paradox, how great time doesn't start with metronome practice, and you'll learn two practical and simple ways to improve your time today so that you're playing confidently without fear of constant speeding up. You can do this. Hey, welcome to The Non-Glamorous Drummer. I'm so glad you're hanging out today. I help self-taught beginner drummers know what to practice so that they can nail songs and sound awesome with a band. I want you to become the drummer other people want to jam with. And hey, to help you do that, if you've had to spend a lot of time on just practicing on your pad, maybe for noise constraints, maybe it's more convenient, you're constrained to pad practice. Trust me, I've been there. I lived in an apartment for 2.5 years. I know how it goes. I have a special free gift for you in the description. This is my Solve Your Weak Hand and Build Fast Fluid Chops that you can apply to the full drum set with 3 daily practice pad exercises. This is your free 30-minute practice routine that you can do on the pad every day that will have you prepared to then get on the full kit. This has helped out so many of my students with just giving them a focused practice routine that they can count on and they can do every day, even if they're just on their pad, like playing on a countertop, playing on their lap, playing at work when they're taking a break. So this will help you out a whole bunch too, especially if you're a beginner. So be sure to grab it. It's in the description. Total no-brainer. My free gift to you. Let's dive into today's lesson. So the timing paradox. Most people think that in order to play with great time, you just need to practice to a metronome more. And yes, we need to practice to metronomes. Don't mishear me. I'm not saying don't practice to a metronome. We do need to do that. But the truth is that great timing, and therefore great feel, all starts with your ear. That's kind of where we're going today. There's more to it than just practicing to a metronome and getting good at practicing to a metronome. It has a lot to do with your ear, more to do with your ear than metronome practice. But there's also a twist to all of this. There's so many times there's a twist where it's like you miss this one thing and it's all out the window. There is a twist to this, and one piece of the puzzle we've got to make sure we're not neglecting, and it determines whether or not all of this is effortless or really difficult. And so I want you to stick with me, because this is all going to tie together and you're going to be feeling so much better about timekeeping by the end of today, where you're not going to have to fear it. You're not going to have to always be afraid that you're speeding up. You're going to be aware of where you're at, aware of your timing. And that's going to be so helpful. I just remember when I was a beginner drummer playing in the high school worship band at my church, number one, I was terrified because I was a high school kid playing in front of my peers with so little drumming experience. It was trial by fire. But I remember Sunday after Sunday, just rushing constantly. If it was a fast song, I would drag. If it was a slow song, I would rush. There was definitely more rushing than dragging, and it was just a mess. And I became afraid of rushing, where I was always like, am I rushing? I don't know if I'm rushing. Am I rushing? I don't know. I was practicing to a metronome all the time at home, and though that was a good thing, I didn't feel like it was helping. I didn't feel confident in my time. And maybe that's where you're at, where you just don't feel like you're able to keep good time, even if you've practiced to a metronome. So I hope that today is going to help you out a lot with that. We're going to get into the whole ear thing. That's a big deal. But before we do that, I want to give you 2 really practical ways, especially if you're a beginner, to start improving your time today. Here you go. Number 1, play to a metronome. Like I said, we do want to play to a metronome. Play to a metronome, but practice your listening by weaning yourself off of the metronome. Here's what I mean by that. So I've got my metronome here on my phone. This is the Tempo Advance app. It's a fantastic app. It's a couple dollars. I've had it for like 15 years. And it's just the only app I've used. So here's 75 beats a minute. The metronome is playing 8th notes, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, which is cool. When we're playing slow like this, 8th notes are helpful. So get to where you're able to play along to that. But metronome weaning, what we want to do is have the metronome play less. So that means cutting back to just quarter notes. 1, 2, 3, instead of the 8th notes. 1, 2, 3. Then if we want to get crazy, let's mute beats 2 and 4 and just have it play on 1 and 3. Listening, 1, 2, 3, 4, but the metronome is just playing 1 and 3. And there it is, still going along with us. So practice doing that. That takes some time. We have a lesson here on the channel that is all about metronome weaning, specifically how to do this. There's another app that's called Gap Click that can be really helpful for metronome weaning because you can set it to play different things. You can have it do a bar of time and then go out for a measure while you're still playing, but it just goes silent and then it comes right back in and you'll find out how good or bad your time was. Very enlightening, very painful, but you have to face the truth, right? If you're going to master the drums, you have to face the facts that, okay, my timing is bad today. A universal drumming truth, and this plays into learning any skill. I've been there too. You have to be okay with being bad before you can be good. I don't know if you've ever thought about that, but a lot of times we feel like we've got to get good at something. And maybe it's an American culture thing. I know here in America, we're all about achieving and success. We've got to get good at stuff. And I felt that way too in high school. It was like, I got to get good at this. I got to be good at this. And so it was very difficult dealing with all the times of failure, which is your learning. You have to fail at this in order to learn. You have to rush and drag and be clumsy and sloppy and make all these mistakes in order to learn from them. And in order to get good, you have to learn by experience with this. And yes, I want to save you some time and pain by giving you some tools and frameworks and ways to do this. But you have to be okay with being bad in order to be good. So this is going to be a struggle at first. If you've never practiced metronome weaning, it's not going to be easy. It's not going to be natural. But remember, I told you about that twist. We're going to get there. That twist, if you work on that whole thing, that's going to help you with this. So we're going to get there in a little bit. Second practical way, before we get into the ear training, record yourself playing, not to a metronome, then go back and listen and try to line up the metronome to your playing. So let's say you've recorded yourself, you're listening back, and you're like, you can tap tempo and tempo advance. So let's say I'm listening to myself, 1, 2, 3. I'm trying to find the tempo. So I get the metronome lined up as best as I can, and then I just listen. Okay, am I speeding up on the recording? Am I slowing down? Or maybe I can't even get it to line up because my time was that bad. Again, you have to be okay with being terrible at this at first. I was terrible at this. There were so many Sundays in the high school worship band when I would count off a song at the total wrong tempo, and there were so many times that I would speed up, I would drag. If there had been recordings, it would be an amazing thing to listen back to if there had been recordings. But you would probably hear me speeding up and then the guitar player dragging, or the bass player speeding up and me dragging. And it was probably a huge mess. And I like to remember it as being, a fun time. And it was fun. I learned to enjoy it. I learned to have a lot of fun. But you've got to be okay with the failures and the messing up the time. And if this feels like a total fail and you're like, Steven, I am horrible at this, that's okay. Keep practicing it. Keep practicing it, and the rest of what we cover today is also going to help you with this. But I give you these first two things as just these are the fundamental beginner practical steps that everybody should be taking. Practice with your metronome, but don't let it become a crutch. We want to wean ourselves off of it so that we're listening, which kind of plays into where we want to go today. So how to train your ear to play with naturally better time. Part of that is what we just talked about. The metronome weaning is training your ear because what happens is you have to listen more to you than the metronome if the metronome is only playing on beats 1 and 3, because you can't just listen to that. Otherwise, you're shooting in the dark. You don't know where to find it. You have to listen to yourself in order to play steadily and in time. And so it means you're listening to your eighth notes. And you're asking yourself, do these feel smooth? Do they feel steady? You're listening to your kick and your cross stick, or I was doing cross stick so I could hear my metronome down here. Whatever your backbeat is, you're listening to that. You're just asking yourself, does that feel smooth? Does that feel in time? So you're using your ear. You're learning to use your ear. And when you listen back to those recordings of yourself, I told you to do in step 2, you're developing self-awareness. And that is powerful because that means you're starting to notice, okay, my tendency is to rush. I probably go like this. You know, could you feel that? How it's like everything wanted to lurch forward? Or let's say we're playing a fast song, but maybe my tendency is to get stiff and drag. Listen back and notice what are those tendencies so that you're developing self-awareness and you're starting to use your ears, your mind and your ears. So How to train your ear to play with naturally better time. What we want to know is know the song. Like, what is the song that you're playing? Whether you're rehearsing it with your band, you're practicing it for fun, you're playing it on a gig, you're playing it at church. Know the song and how its tempo feels so that you're using your ear to adjust time. You're not relying on your hands to tell you how fast you're playing. You're not trying to imagine a click in your ear. That's awful. We don't even want the click to be the primary thing we're listening to. Let's say okay, you more intermediate advanced drummers, maybe you're playing to a metronome in your ear while playing with a band. This is what we do at church. You don't want this to be the primary thing you're thinking about. You need to get to a point where it's there and it's making sure that you don't speed up or slow down, but that should not be the primary thing you're paying attention to. Your timing needs to be good enough that you're not having to listen to the click. Instead, you're listening to other things, including how the song feels. So what does this mean? We want to know the song and how its tempo feels so that we're using our ear to adjust our time. Play along to and practice the song a bunch. You might notice this already with a song you've grown up with, a song you've listened to a lot. You can hear it in your head. You can hear that song playing. Like, think of a song right now, like Don't Stop Believin' by Journey. So there's a song, massive hit. Everybody in the world knows that song. You could probably get that song going in your head, and I bet you can pretty accurately remember the tempo. There's no such thing as perfect tempo. None of us are robots or computers, but when we think of a song, we can recall tempo pretty well because a song is human and it's emotional and it's melodic, and so we remember it in our heads. So you could probably recall the tempo of Don't Stop Believin' pretty well. Of course, that song even, there's an ebb and flow with tempo. They didn't record it to a click, and so some parts it kind of speeds up, other times it lays back. But you could probably hear that in your head, and you could probably even learn those speed ups and those slow downs, just like with a Led Zeppelin song or a Beatles song, the way that they might play it. They didn't record to a metronome. The tempo would fluctuate just a little bit, but it felt human, it felt emotional. And you can learn to imitate those by listening to the song over and over again and always remembering, okay, they speed up a little here, they slow down a little here. And it just becomes natural because you've listened to the song so much, you just hear it and you feel it that way. So if you're playing too fast, but you're listening, you're like, this feels too fast. This moment in the song doesn't feel right. It feels too fast. Let me slow down. You're not thinking to yourself, I'm playing at 115. I need to be down at 109 beats a minute. No, we're not computers. We're not thinking that way. We're thinking this feels too fast. Let me slow this down a little bit so it feels better. So you can make those adjustments on the fly as you're jamming with your buddies, as you're playing with the band, and playing a song at the right tempo with good timing, not rushing or dragging, really does become a lot less scary. When you're playing on a gig, you'll know whether the tempo feels right in the moment because you've learned that song's tempo. Does that make sense? We must learn how a tempo feels. Now, the interesting thing about this with learning how a tempo feels is that 90 beats a minute, if I'm playing, okay, here's my metronome, 90 beats a minute. "90 beats a minute playing that feels totally different than 90 beats a minute playing if you're doing something syncopated, that's going to feel different at a tempo than something straight at a tempo. But it all comes back to the song thing. You're learning how that song feels. So if you're playing a song like Billie Jean, for example, that's a very simple money beat, you're learning how that groove feels at that tempo in that song. Versus, let's say you're playing a song that has like a more jungle drum feel. Well, that's going to feel totally different, but it's going to be in the context of that song. And so if you know the song and how the song feels, it doesn't matter what the tempo number is. You're just paying attention. How does this feel? Does it feel too fast? Does it feel too slow? Let me make these subtle adjustments as I go because I've learned how that tempo feels in that song. I've learned how that song feels. And that's what we have to start doing. And that's where just listening to a song a whole bunch and practicing along to it, playing along to it, that is critical. And you'll find that that helps your time so much. Focus less on practicing to a metronome and more on just learning the tempo of the song that you're playing. But there's a twist to this. There's a final piece of the puzzle I told you about earlier that we have to cover. This is a deeper reason why you might struggle with timekeeping, and why you could do all the things we talked about today, but still struggle with timekeeping and this whole thing be difficult rather than natural and effortless. And here it is. The quality of your grip and motion will either make these methods effortless or difficult. So what do I mean by this? If your grip is not solid, consistent, loose, controlled, all the words we can use to describe good grip, then that means your motion, the motion of the stick, is not going to be smooth. Now, just think about this. If the motion of your stick is not smooth, then how is your timekeeping going to be smooth? And a lot of times that's the core issue with a beginner drummer. And this is definitely an issue that I had for sure, especially when I was trying to learn to play louder, because if you're playing loudly and you're moving around the kit a lot, that motion is critical. And if you don't have smooth motion, then the timing is not naturally going to be smooth. It's kind of like, I always like using the trampoline analogy or the basketball analogy of, if you're dribbling a basketball, it's pretty easy to dribble that basketball in time. If you keep the same height, it's going to keep bouncing based on its weight, the amount of rubbery, the amount of inflation, how much bounce it's going to get, how well it's inflated, gravity, all these things play into it, all these parts of the physics equation, but it's going to be very consistent. However much it bounces is going to be consistent. Just like you're jumping on a trampoline as a kid. You're not trying to jump at a steady tempo, but inevitably you do, because your weight is not changing. The tension of those springs and the trampoline is not changing. So you're just going to keep going at that steady rate unless you get quieter or you get smaller, big. You get the idea. I love analogies. Hopefully you do too. So that's the idea. And you find that the same is totally true with our drumsticks, where if the motion is consistent, the time is consistent. And so if we're trying to play with better timekeeping, having a loose motion goes a really long way to doing that. Just like if we're trying to move around the drum set. Anything like that, especially if it's really slow, in order to create a smooth, a feeling of smooth time at a slow tempo like that, or if you're playing loud and you're having to move a lot, that motion is critical, and all of that motion starts right here with the grip. Now, going into all the nitty-gritty of the grip is beyond where we want to go in today's lesson. So I'm going to link some additional lessons in the description, because we talk about this kind of stuff a whole bunch on the channel because it's so important. And if you've been a very astute beginner, you're sitting here playing and you're noticing, okay, my hands don't feel good, my motion doesn't feel smooth, nothing feels natural, then odds are, no matter how much you work on your metronome practice, no matter how much you try to learn tempos of songs and do all that good stuff, you're still going to have trouble, because the core issue is right here with your hands. And so that might be where you need to spend some time, so that you're getting, you've got that hinge point. You've got a fulcrum established that allows the stick to hinge, and you're using the right kind of grip that gives you enough control yet looseness so that you can move around the kit and feel fluid, even hitting a floor tom, even hitting the edge of a cymbal or the edge of hi-hats. So I hope you're taking action with me today, doing these things, working on the core issues of grip, because this will take you from shaky time. A lot of times shaky time is caused by grip issues, or rushing or dragging, which is caused by the general timing issues we talked about first, or the ear training or lack thereof. You can go from that. You can go from that fear of always speeding up that I was dealing with in high school and even into college, especially in jazz band in college. I was always terrified of that was my greatest fear. I was always rushing, and I always felt like I'm on the edge of rushing. And so that was something I had to work on in college in the jazz context, and learning, how does this jazz song feel? You can go from all of that. I don't want you to spend time in the land of fearing tempo stuff anymore. And I want you to get to where you were playing confidently with solid time, knowing that you're right, that your tempo is right, that you're not rushing, that you're not dragging, and you're not playing clumsily. I promise you that everything we've talked about today will help you do just that. So, question for you as you go: where do you need to focus your timekeeping growth? Do you need to focus on your grip and your motion? Do you need to practice metronome weaning? Do you need to record yourself more and just become more self-aware of what are your tendencies? Do you need to spend more time listening to songs and really learning how a song feels, learning that tempo, developing your ear to listen to yourself more and listen to the whole context of the song so that you're playing with better time? Maybe that's where you're at. I've been through all of these where my weakness was every one of these. And so it's kind of a progression. You tackle them one at a time and you make sure that, okay, we're working on this and then that, and you're just taking it one step at a time. And like we said last week, sometimes you got to be really bad before you can be good. And so stick with it, stay patient, and hey, I hope this has helped you out. Be sure to grab the e-guide, the practice pad 30-minute routine guide. That's going to help you out a whole bunch if you're constrained to pad practice, and especially if you have a weak hand and you're wanting to work on some skills on the pad that will translate to the full kit. Be sure to grab that, my free gift to you, in the description. But hey, I hope today's lesson has been helpful as always. I will see you on the next lesson. Stay non-glamorous. Know that you can do this.